Are we ready to just jump into it?
Yeah, let's just go.
We're just gonna fucking go. Welcome back to Bastard Sword. I am Drew.
I'm Josh. Welcome to episode 20.
Episode number 20. That's a big milestone. I didn't really realize we were there already, but that's cool.
Yeah, we actually stuck to something this long. It's incredible.
That doesn't happen.
Well, I think we've been pretty good in our lives lately. Like we've been consistent for the past few years. Or we're just in post-COVID monotony, one or the other, but it's going fine. We're doing okay.
Just kind of slowly grinding away at things, and I'll take it. And this week we're slowly grinding away at a big franchise that I think we've probably mentioned a few times on here, but
maybe.
Yeah, we haven't covered any of them yet, which is Resident Evil. We're doing some Resident Evil 5.
Yeah. We're starting with the weirdest one out of the bunch besides 6, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have like this contrarian streak where I always want to go to the kind of like weird black sheep, underappreciated or overlooked or kind of bad and hated versions of the series first before I look at the actual good ones. I don't know. It's something wrong with me. Like I should probably talk to my therapist about it, but anyway, it gets us some good content about fucking Resident Evil 5. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to just go in and like praise a game and be like, oh, it's incredible. We love it. But then you have like this sort of hodgepodge of a game that's just like not sure what era it's in. It's trying to recreate what Resident Evil 4 did, but then, kind of branch out too. So it's fun.
It is fun. We'll get to how fun it is here in a second. Let's what's your history with Resident Evil? We should start with that. I feel like we start with that.
Yeah, that's a good one. What is my I think it was Resident Evil 2 and then 3 on the N64. I think I rented them as a kid and I had no fucking clue what I was getting into. And like at the time, it was probably like the scariest game, maybe like the scariest piece of media that I had experienced at that point. Like aside from like 90s horror movies like Scream or whatever. Yeah, got into those, was pretty much hooked at that point. I had the original Resident Evil 4 for GameCube. And then I think I still have it. The PlayStation 2 version. Yeah, it's up there on my shelf. And yeah, I've pretty much been at it since then. I think probably that's where most people get hooked. And I also had the remake. I think we talked a little bit about the Resident Evil 1 remake at one point.
Yeah, we have talked about that.
I think that solidified it for me because I was also like, holy shit, like look how good they are at graphics and making this realistic survival horror game. And, it's kind of dated, but it still looks good now.
Oh, it still does. I actually have been playing that a little recently, and especially like on the Steam Deck, it looks fantastic on that smaller screen. Yeah.
Smaller screen, and they've scaled everything up to 1080, and it's pretty clean from the when I've played of the remaster. So yeah, hell yeah,
it holds up well. So have you pretty much stuck with the series since then, and kind of like consistently checked out the games as they were coming out, or have you missed some? Or?
I would say so. I did sleep on 7 for a little while. I was kind of turned off by the first person view. And then I had a friend who kept being like, no, it's good. It's right on the money with like the original series and all that. So when I actually started to play it, I just like, I think 8 was about to come out. So I just played 7, played all the DLC, went right into Resident Evil Village or 8. And I mean, my only slip up was 6, and then someone loaned it to me, and I think I played like 80% of the game and was like, I think I'm good. I just kind of bowed out of that one. I didn't have strong opinions about it.
Yeah. What about like the offshoots, the Revelations and Operation Raccoon City and all that shit? Did you really get into those or?
No, I forgot about those. Honestly, I've had a few people tell me to play the first 2 Revelations games, which I think they're available for free to me. And I should probably try that at some point. I've followed some of the stories, but it's kind of just like the ins and outs of other characters in between games. And I think it makes the canon more confusing. So I'm not getting like pulled into that. I haven't played what was that? The really bad shooter. Was that Raccoon City?
Oh, what are you meaning? Like the light gun shooter for the like original PlayStation, or one of the? There's been so many different games. I think that was like Resident Evil Survivor or something.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of like Raccoon City, the one that was like a bad third person shooter.
Okay, yeah, like Operation like Raccoon City, I think it was.
Yeah, and I was kind of excited for that like multiplayer like cell shaded game they were going for, and then I think they scrapped it, or it was just really bad. No one played it. I can't remember. I don't even remember what that was called. It was like Nexus or some shit like that.
I don't know. There have been so many weird offshoots from Resident Evil. Like, yeah, it's a very deep franchise, I guess. So many like side projects came from it.
And we've been talking Mega Man. Go play the Mega Man X8 16-bit demake. It's incredible. But like Capcom, like they are just really good at getting like a franchise that has like limitless potential and then like fumbling the bag like 4 times in a row until they get it right. I don't understand. And like I just played a fan made game of Mega Man X. I was like, I would have paid for that. Like that was so good. I mean, maybe because I played it for free, I've had different feelings, but it was a solid classic Mega Man experience. And I get scared with Capcom. I feel like they're on a streak again. I hope they don't start doing weird shit.
If, like,
things change or shift, you know?
Yeah, I just kind of wonder, like Resident Evil was unstoppable and then it was unstartable. Is that a phrase? Yeah, it hit like a serious they flooded it. It hit a real rough patch where it was just kind of like meandering for a while, and it seemed like it was just kind of like a legacy franchise that seemed like it had run its course, and then it came back and now it's stronger than ever. So yeah, it's Capcom has a weird record with that.
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah, so my history with Resident Evil is like one of my bigger blind spots, actually. So this is probably like the least exposure I have to a major franchise like this that I would still consider myself a fan of. I played the original PlayStation 1 Resident Evil on release. I was all about it. You know, I was a little nerd. I was like all into the gaming magazines and everything. They were hyping it up pre-release, and I was just like eating up all the coverage of it. I never actually owned it. I rented it a bunch of times. I beat it. Yeah. But I was like, hell yeah, dude, this shit rules. And kind of same thing. I was like, it was the scariest media that you could consume as like an 11-year-old or whatever I was at the time. And yeah, it was just really neat. Opened me up to the entire horror genre. And then I have just seen the franchise, like interacted with it in really limited bits and pieces since then. I played a little bit of Resident Evil 2 at like friends' houses or whatever. Did not play 3. Played like a couple minutes of Code Veronica. I played through Resident Evil 4, and then I really just like I've picked up a lot of what's going on with it through cultural osmosis, but have not actually played any of the other games. I think I did do the demo of Village, but yeah, I've been kind of rectifying that and digging back through them lately, and I thought that 5 would be an interesting jumping on point, because this seems to be generally regarded as the start of its sort of dropping the ball period, kind of where they started to really try to figure out what they were wanting to do with the franchise, and it started to sort of go off the rails. And actually, I still like this a lot. I mean, yeah. Spoilers, I guess, but yeah, I think this is still really good. So I'm kind of curious to dig through the rest of the games a little more and kind of fill in that gap in my resume. Like my gamer credentials are seriously lacking here with my lack of Resident Evil exposure.
Well, I mean, and you found that great deal. I think it was Humble Bundle. We paid like $10 and got most of it pretty much filled out my catalog. It had like all the classic games, a few of the remaster remakes. I think everything up to like 7 Village and the Resident Evil 4 remake, probably, maybe Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and so you haven't experienced any of the remakes or anything?
I have played some of the RE2 remake, and it
Okay.
is incredible. I haven't beat it. I just played it for a little bit when it came out on Game Pass. But yeah, I've got it teed up to get to after I work through a couple of the other games. Because yeah, that game seems amazing.
Yeah, and I think that'll be refreshing for us to kind of like hit the weird beats of these games and then kind of go back to what I would consider like a return to form mostly. I know people have complaints about some of the things in 2 and then really don't like 3. But you know, for the 3 remake, for like when you get the game for $10, it's really not too bad. Like I would have been mad paying like $50 or $60 for it on release, but you know, I think it's pretty solid for what it is. Oh, and I figured out what the other thing was. They put out a game called Resident Evil Reverse or Resident Evil Verse.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that actually.
Yeah, it was a free game that came with the release of Village Gold Edition. And it's like a multiverse game that has all of the cast of basically just reusing assets from like all the recent modern games and like having all these characters square off in like arena shooter battles of some sort.
Yeah.
Apparently everyone hated it. It was a real big flop. It's still available. It looks like as of last year or no, 2022, they were updating it. And they've dropped it since like October of 2022. So
yeah, it is in my Steam library. I think it came along with that Humble Bundle that I got, which, the version I got had basically everything up to the 4 remake. It does not have that, but it has like Village and everything. I don't think it came with the classic versions of RE 1 and 2 and 3, which I think you could still get on Steam, actually. Yeah. That's another thing. Like, say what you will about Capcom kind of fumbling with some of their franchises, but I appreciate how available all of these games are still. Like, it's kind of crazy. I can't think of another franchise where you can still get the original, like, 32-bit era versions of the games and the remakes and play them on pretty much any modern console with no headache. Like, that is super cool to me.
That is a fair point to make with a lot of their games. They've kept mostly everything available. I know there's been like some weird stuff, but even Mega Man, like kind of waiting for these collections. I think we got, not Capcom, but we got a recent Castlevania collection that we need to check out as well.
Yeah, the DS collection, or I don't remember what the collection's called, but it's the DS games. Yeah,
for sure. So, that is nice. And on that note, hold on to your Ubisoft games, maybe.
Oh, God. Yeah, because they may be going away soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that company's having some issues right now, which will probably be kind of old news by the time we release this, but I doubt they're going to have, like, turned around by then.
I feel like, by the time we get through some of this stuff and, something will pop off that'll be worth talking about. So we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. You want to go ahead and get to Resident Evil 5?
Sure.
Let's get to Resident Evil 5. So this game released in March of 2009. It's in the Xbox 360, PS3 era. So you get some of that fun, like brown and bloom kind of smeared type of vibe to it. This was the, I guess, hotly anticipated follow-up to Resident Evil 4, which kind of rejuvenated the franchise. Like, this franchise has had so many rejuvenations. Yeah, so many like returns to form. But yeah, this came out after Resident Evil 4 kind of shifted the franchise in a different direction, and everyone loved it. And it was weird. So this game sold like fucking crazy. I actually did not realize until I was doing research how big of a game this actually was. This is to date still the best-selling Resident Evil game ever. It has sold 15.2 million copies as of this Reddit post I found from February of this year, which is wild to me, given how big the franchise is, how esteemed it is, how many undisputed classics it has, that this one that people generally kind of, I don't think people really hate it, but it's sort of looked at as one of the harbingers of bad things to come, and I guess where the franchise kind of jumped the shark, and yet everyone has bought it apparently.
That was surprising to me as well. Like, I didn't expect to find out that this game sold as well as it did. And I think that's like with the knowledge of like what Resident Evil 6 is and how it just like gets insane with the action horror side of things. So yeah, just want to throw that in.
Yeah, definitely. So this one was a pretty big departure. Gameplay wise, it's, you know, a pretty straightforward refinement of 4. It continues to lean more in the action direction. It gets rid of almost any pretense of horror. There's still some like creepy stuff happening, but this is really an action game, like front and foremost. One of the big inspirations for it was apparently Black Hawk Down, which is not something I think of when I picture Resident Evil, but that's kind of the vibe we're getting, that sort of Call of Duty, Middle East, and a lot of African, which we'll get to the controversy around that in a little bit too. But yeah, just this kind of like bright daylight wartime type of setting with a side of some weird tentacle monsters, as opposed to the horror that the franchise was known for up to this point. And that's the source of a lot of the big controversy with the game, just in terms of the general player reception. The other big controversy is, well, the locations. So this game has a reputation of being, let's say, racially insensitive. Do you have any thoughts on that whole situation?
Yeah, so I was actually just like watching some stuff about that. And, you know, like the common, or I guess like the ground level claim was that, you know, it's Chris Redfield, this white military guy showing up to kill a bunch of like West African residents who, you know, are infected and are zombies and are trying to kill you. But I guess just the general look of that struck a lot of people in a weird way. And, you know, I think that's fair to some degree. But for the most part of the story, like it's pretty straightforward that, you know, you're not just like killing innocent civilians. There are other black characters who are working with you and are helping you, and you're on a mission. Shit's going bad. I would say the worst thing is the tribal enemies, which we discussed when we were playing. They're almost like caricature-esque. It's a little bit too heavy-handed. And I would say that's probably like the most problematic thing in the subject matter of the game. But also, the game doesn't dwell on any of this. Like, it's not part of the dialogue, or, you know, it's basically like, hey, we got to get to point Delta to do the next thing and stop the guy to that shit, stop the virus. So yeah, I don't think it's that bad. I think it was maybe a knee-jerk reaction at the time, and we didn't have like this sort of weird cultural social stuff going on like with games at all. It was 2009, so that just wasn't like a thing that happened regularly.
Right, yeah. I think of it as more tone deaf than malicious.
Yes, like, exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean with the tribal people.
Yeah, and they're just, like you say, they're a caricature, and that is almost underselling like how ridiculous it is. You basically go into like an Ace Ventura When Nature Calls village and just start like slaughtering all of these like ancient, you know, tribesmen with their, you know, colorful like headdresses and everything. It is so just on the nose, to the point like you can't tell if it's a parody or not.
I almost typed Crash Bandicoot-esque mask. Like, right. I just, every time that enemy pops up with the big tribal mask, I was like, is this Crash Bandicoot shit? And I realized like maybe that is part of my own ignorance, like thinking of it that way. But Either way, it just doesn't look good, you know? It's kind of weird.
It's definitely like the presentation of it. It is so just patently ridiculous that it's impossible to take seriously. And like, I can understand that it's not great. Like, it's not a good representation of anything.
No.
But it's so absurd that to me, it's like, it's difficult to get genuinely like mad at. It's just one of those things. It's like, why is this so fucking stupid? And just to throw out a disclaimer, we say this as two white guys living in a place in West Virginia with, you know, the cultural diversity of a like Billy Ray Cyrus concert. So take our opinions as you will. But it's kind of, it's a thing. It's kind of it's sort of ridiculous. It also sort of ties in with the whole ridiculous tone of the game that kind of, I don't know, it doesn't entirely work for me. So up to this point, and then even, you know, going back after the RE2 remake and Resident Evil 7 sort of brought the series back on track, it's always had a tone of this schlocky B-movie horror stuff that is generally, you know, has a feeling of being self-aware. Resident Evil 4 had Leon's like over-the-top badass golden retriever energy action hero quips that kind of bordered on it for me in sort of a masterful way, where it felt like the game was kind of poking fun at it, but also to an extent, it felt like there might have been some sincerity behind it.
I don't know if they became self-aware, because everyone always talks about the Jill sandwich line from the first game.
Right.
Like how bad like some of that dialogue and writing is. And it's like, are they trying to be funny, or were they just like, is it just clunky writing? And it works to their advantage in this way. I don't know. Yeah.
This game is where that kind of, it crosses the line from being charming to just being pretty stupid. And like, it gets to the point where before there was like some reasonable doubt that no, they know how fucking stupid it is. Here, you get the feeling that at some point someone involved in this thinks that this is just the coolest, most badass shit that has ever been, you know, put into polygons.
Well, yeah, you could tell like they were having a degree of fun with it, and that, like you said, like nothing in the game is malicious, but they also wanted to take it in like a more serious direction. So they kind of, it tone shift a little bit more from like Resident Evil 4 and the quippiness and all that to like taking themselves so seriously that like Chris is talking about like the failures of capitalism at the beginning of the game, and like that's how Sheva meets him, is he's just like, you know, like the world's a cruel place and capitalism is bad and stuff like that. And it's they double down with like how cartoonishly evil like the villains are. Like they're meant to be like serious like smugglers and like elite you know, manipulators, and like they just come off like really silly and over the top, especially like Excella. She's just like evil Italian woman. It's I mean, who trying, I guess.
Yeah, who I'm pretty sure is named after like an antidepressant that I've taken before.
Excella. Yeah. Think about that deep cut dress.
Yeah, the tone of it just, it's so stupid. Like it can be fun, but it also could be a little grating. It's not, you know, that pure undiluted recommendation of like Resident Evil 4 or, you know, the older or the newer ones beyond that. It's just, it's got, you don't know how much self-awareness is there. It feels like it's got too much and not enough at the same time. And like you said, you start out with Chris Redfield talking about, you know, this is what capitalism will do. And then you go into like this forgotten tribal African village and start shooting a whole bunch of people to steal their precious gems and sell them to buy upgrades, like buy a bigger clip for your assault rifle. It's just, everything about it is just the most
backwards
ridiculous
colonialism,
shit.
the reverse, like the double reverse colonialism happening as we're like, get all the money, get all the gems, get all, like the looting aspect, like made us do some silly shit as we're like trying to battle off all these enemies. And it's like, and you go from like a village to a cave to a lab to a mine section, old temple. Like they try to follow the beats they did in 4, but it comes off even more like all over the place because every next story area is like a totally different, disconnected, weird location.
Yeah, it's wildly incoherent. You have like the kind of Resident Evil 4 type of, fending things off in like a little village kind of defense type of areas where you're overwhelmed with enemies and you're going through these kind of like rundown locations. And then you're in an Indiana Jones tomb solving puzzles. It's like, okay.
And I get like, it kind of works in 4 because it feels like everything is connected and within walking distance. And they like double down on that design with the remake, that there's actually like a map and everything feels pretty open and connected until you move on to the next part of the story. And this game just like throws you into a turret section to get you to the next thing. You're on a truck, you're on a boat, you're fighting a boss on a boat. It's just like moving you to each new set piece, and it's kind of jarring and gets old really fast, despite the gameplay actually being kind of fun.
Yeah, it's got, it's barely held together with like tape and bubble gum. It's pretty rickety. It also has a lot of that. Is it 7th generation? Is the 360 and PS3 the 7th generation?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I need fact checked here. Yeah. So it's got a lot of those design tropes. There are so many quick time events. They're really obnoxious. I think it's actually a little worse in 6, but yeah, there's a lot of, mash X and whatever, press these buttons to dodge, that kind of bullshit that just was bad at the time, actually. And I think everyone realized it was bad, but people still kept putting it in games. But yeah, that stuff stands out. It's got a lot of the mandatory turret sections and these big like action set pieces and stuff that you expect from that generation of games. But aside from that, like you mentioned, the gameplay is really, really good, actually. It's basically Resident Evil 4, but just kind of refined a little bit tighter. So it's this kind of weird middle ground where this pretty much still has tank controls, actually. Like everyone gave the older Resident Evil games shit for having tank controls, but this is really just that, but over the shoulder. You have to stay planted to aim at things. You control pretty stiltedly and like a tank, but it ends up giving the game a really cool pacing to it where it's frantic, but it's not like super fast paced, and you have to be like really deliberate with your shots because you can't run away. Like if you're aiming at someone, you are either, you're either attacking or you are running away. You cannot do both at the same time. And the game does a really good job of like overwhelming you with numbers and putting you in all these desperate situations that feel unwinnable, but it also gives you just enough tools to make sure you can get through that. It's really good. I liked it.
Yeah, I'd say they capitalized like on the balance that worked really well in Resident Evil 4, and like also proved to work even better in like the Mercenaries sub game. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but we should actually try it on 5 sometime. But it's like fighting hordes of enemies and keeping the timer up and like collecting ammo and weapons as you go, which it works really well in the remake as well. But yeah, I didn't realize that the tank controls were like that until I went back. Like when I played like the remakes, I was like, oh, like this, it's been this way since Resident Evil 4, but I was wrong.
Right.
Like it just felt that like it controlled so well that it didn't occur to me that it was actually tank control.
Yeah. It's really, it's kind of interesting how that worked, because like Resident Evil 4 course, with this big sea change that, revolutionized third-person shooters, and it really just took the controls of the old games that everyone hated and recontextualized them. And there's more to it than that. Like the way the enemies are designed and the way the aiming works and everything is a big part of why these games work as well as they do. But yeah, it is kind of crazy that this hated relic of the past control scheme actually is part of some of the best action games that have ever been made and some of the most influential ones. So that's kind of cool. The other way that this expanded on 4 is it feels to me like the melee is a much bigger deal here than it was in 4. And I don't know if that's just my perception because this is co-op, so it's more feasible, but that definitely feels expanded and a lot more entertaining, actually.
Yeah, I think they flinch a little more. It works kind of like Resident Evil 4, like you get a headshot, you get a knee shot, you can do a special attack, or you get them from behind, and you can also do like Leon would do like the suplex, which every character has like unique moves, and they seem more like apt to flinch and like give you those openings, and those also work really well for like crowd control, which is something I noticed when I first played like the mercenaries in Resident Evil 4. So yeah, they're just like building on it. And it's not like, I feel like they keep adding to this mixture. And then like by 6, it was like out of control, like overflowing. Because in 6, it's like punch, dodge, dive, do all this shit. You're like, what? I was just standing and punching before, like headshot, punch, etc. Move on.
Yeah, the animations really, really sell it. And like I don't want to say interactivity of the environment, but like when you punch or kick people, they go flying back and they'll fly into enemies behind them. They'll fly through like breakable doors and everything. And it feels so tactile and violent. Chris is like this giant, just hulking Gears of War beast of a person. And he just, like punches a zombie in the fucking face and they fly back like 40 feet. It's so stupid and over the top and satisfying. And it also gives a nice, like pace to the gameplay loop where, like you said, you are going for those like knee shots or headshots or whatever to stagger the enemy and then run in and melee them and, help clear out the crowd some and build some room. It all plays together really nice along with the balance of, how much ammo you have and everything. I don't think we could really consider this a survival horror game, but ammo is still something that you do have to manage. You're never really hurting for ammo, but you're also never really overflowing. And it does contribute to that little like holy trinity type deal, taking, from the Halo terminology, although I guess this doesn't really have the trinity, but whatever. Yeah. The holy duopoly of shooting some weird zombie dudes in the kneecap and then punching them in the face. It's satisfying.
Yeah, it works surprisingly well. And yeah, just how physical everything is. Like the sort of like slapping noises you get from like all the melee attacks. The sound design is great in this game too. I would say like all the music and sound effects and like when things get really loud and chaotic, like it all serves its purpose and works very effectively for like being a kind of dated game. And yeah, I was going to say like in the co-op, like we didn't really have ammo issues. Like we were sharing resources to a certain degree, but this game always keeps you stocked up with something. Like it doesn't give you like an unwinnable fight. Except for that one that we got into.
God, yeah. I'm shaking my head. You can't see, but
yeah, we got to a boss that was actually unwinnable because of our frame rate or something like that.
Yeah. So my understanding is that there's this one boss that the bosses in this game are kind of okay. I mean, I don't think they're great, but they're generally fine. It's pretty standard. There's a big glowing weak spot, and sometimes you have to shoot the weak spot to make the real weak spot appear. And there's this one boss that's about halfway through the game, maybe 2/3 of the way, that the real weak spot only appears for a certain amount of time after he takes fire damage, but apparently the frames for that are tied to the frame rate of the game, and there's some kind of weird issue with the modern versions of it that of course tend to run at a much higher frame rate than when the game was released, and so it makes it so that weak spot does not actually appear long enough to cause damage to the boss. So we fought that boss so many fucking times. We were just like
5 attempts over like, or 6 like attempts over like an hour or two.
Yeah, we're just running around like unloading, flamethrower gas and bullets into this thing, and it's just not going down. We're just like, what is even happening?
To the point that we actually did run out of ammo and had to like just die or quit out. And I think I was a couple beers deep at that point. I was just like, oh my God, I just want this to end.
Yeah,
but I was like also sucked in. I was like, we can do it, dude. Like it's beatable. It's gotta be,
Yeah, I don't think either of us were sober enough to realize what was going on at the time, and we weren't drunk enough to like really give up on it. We were just at that sweet point where we were just gonna zone out and fucking unload bullets into this thing for an hour uncritically, just like, man, this thing's still alive.
The gamer equivalent of rolling the boulder up the hill is basically, except for the game that actually is that. That's pretty much what we were doing.
Yeah, but yeah, aside from that, the bosses are okay. I don't think they're the strong point, but they do what they need to do. I didn't hate them. I think in general, the design of the encounters and levels and everything in this is pretty well done. It's obviously all built heavily with co-op in mind. Even if you're not playing with someone, you have your co-op partner with you, controlled by AI at all times. And it's just, this is the start of Resident Evil's big co-op phase, where everything had to have two players at all times, which, had some benefits and some not benefits. It detracted and added in, I'd say, almost equal measure, maybe, because the co-op's fun, but it also kind of handicaps the design in a lot of ways and just necessarily removes a lot of the tension that you get in survival horror games. But yeah, regardless, the overall design of this, I think kind of is best in the beginning half, and then sort of starts to fall apart near the end once it starts just throwing a lot of the more obnoxious enemies at you, and it becomes kind of like a test of will, like a war of attrition.
Yeah, for sure. It's starting to feel that way through our playthrough.
Yeah, and then you get to just some of the most ridiculous shit at the end. Some of the dumbest boss fights, like the most infuriating boss fights, combined with the story just amping up to just completely like unbelievable levels, and just some of the like dumbest, most mimetic dialogue that just became these like viral moments early on.
We got brainwashing, kidnapping, Matrix moves, like Wesker is basically just Neo. He just moves and attacks like Neo. And also I didn't really consider this, but like when he brainwashes Jill and like makes Jill like his little minion, he like makes her dye her hair blonde like his.
Yes.
Which I didn't fucking realize until like I was rewatching a thing about it. I was like, oh wait, why? That's kind of a weird thing to add in. Yeah, and like punching boulders and shit like that. Like, again, they wanted to be serious, but they put like the silliest shit possible into the actual narrative of the game. And I think it's endearing to some degree. It's like those sort of like over the top camp trash action movies that you're like, this sucks, but it's also entertaining, so I'm gonna keep going. Like maybe like the later Rambo movies or something like that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like I kind of love it, but it's also terrible, as opposed to Resident Evil 4, which is like, I love it and I think it's actually good. I just don't know how intentional the goodness is.
Yeah.
Where this is like, it's so bad that it almost doesn't even matter how intentional the badness is. And it's great if you can dig that kind of thing, which I absolutely can. But yeah, it is just beyond the pale how ridiculous and stupid kind of like all the story beats and a lot of the characters are.
Well, I mean, with 4 remake, it's like they figured out what was good about the camp and what worked, and like they managed to give it a darker, more realistic, somewhat grounded tone. But you know, they cut some of the silly shit from the original, but like it's all foundationally still kind of fucking silly, isn't it? Like,
oh, 100%.
You know, like the Ganados enemies are just like the most stereotypical like European villager trying to kill you shit.
Yeah, and it's not like they're any more or less stereotypical than a lot of the enemies in Resident Evil 5. It's just there's a very different tone to the presentation there.
There's that one Turkish guy, okay?
There is the one Turkish guy.
There's like a questionably white Turkish guy with a mustache who appears as an enemy throughout the game, because there's only like 7 or 8 enemy models that reappear in these waves, and then
there's not a lot. You kill the same guy a lot of times.
Yeah. But then they start throwing all that, like you said, to an annoying degree. They're like, now there's flying enemies, now there's dogs, now there's like big bug enemies, and like they just kind of keep upping the ante just enough to like almost make you feel like you're going crazy, but the combat works so well that it's not enough to just like make you like quit or rage quit or anything like that.
Yeah, it does get a little old when it's like, oh, okay, so now every single enemy that I see has a rocket launcher and or like a riot shield. I'm like, okay, cool. I get it.
I think it worked, you know, again, I just got to go back to 4 every time. Just kind of how they incrementally make the Ganados like a little bit stronger, but they don't hit you with like unholy waves of them. Like in the castle, they start getting shields, and then they've got like more elite guys. And I think what they throw like heavies at you in this game, and that is also annoying too. Like the bullet sponge enemies that just the chainsaw guys are back, but they take like twice as much ammo to kill. It feels like.
Yeah, they really do. And a lot of it is it's probably easier to be critical of this than is entirely fair, because 4 is pretty near a perfect video game. Like, I don't know of anything that does what Resident Evil 4 does as well as it does. And this is just doing what Resident Evil 4 did, but like 20% worse for the most part.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say maybe Alan Wake 2 like almost got there. But then I think about like kind of the lack of variety in enemies and like scenarios, but there's a little spice there. I think that they came pretty close with that one, but yeah, kind of it stood on a pillar of its own for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. And so it's a difficult game to follow up, and it's not, you know, a bad thing. I don't think that Capcom went in kind of a completely different direction instead of trying to recreate that tone and the lightning in a bottle of the first game. Like I get why they kind of reached out a little bit with this, but yeah, definitely not quite the perfect little product that came before it, but still good. Like I genuinely had a lot of fun with this game, and you know, especially with being one of the more poorly regarded. Like I don't think anyone thinks this is the worst Resident Evil, but it's definitely not listed in even like the top 5 of the series or anything by most people. Yeah, and you know, I think it was really good. yeah, can't comment on its ranking overall, but yeah, definitely pretty solid all around in my opinion. Do you want to talk a little bit about the story? Because
there's a story.
There's apparently a story.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, not being in tune with the Resident Evil lore, like I said, my exposure to the series is really in bits and pieces. So not having that established history with it, which this seems to rely on a lot, this entire thing is just a giant fucking fever dream to me.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, like, it's sandwiched in between 4 and 6. And and 6 is just so out there and a little bit over the top. Well, obviously over the top, but like even more. It just keeps upping the ante to the point that it was like off-putting, I guess. And this game feels like they were trying to like bridge that gap and then kind of poke into like the American shooter market, because they knew that Resident Evil 4 did well in America too. So yeah, like this Western shooter, like having like the cover shooting in some spots, but not like fully committing to it. And that kind of like shows up in the story too, because in 4, like Leon is like an agent of the president and is like saving the president's daughter, and like that's pretty, like, you know, we've seen that movie. So they're kind of like taking that with Chris and then putting him in a new anti-bioweapons military unit, or maybe they're like a PMC. I'm not sure. The BSSA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where they started like stacking things, like, okay, you add the Las Plagas, you add the Umbrella shit, you add new corporations that are involved, like Tricell, which is needlessly confusing and is like seen through immediately. But I think like I don't think Chris realizes it until like halfway through the game, even though he's like, Tricell, that's weird. They're working with us. What are they doing in an Umbrella lab? It's like, dude, like you could have just shot through that. So yeah, like they're adding new villains, and then they're bringing back like Wesker and Jill and kind of connecting it to the story of the first game. So it's them trying to like piece all this shit together after such a long timeline of disconnected protagonists. And they thought, well, it worked really well with Leon coming back in 4, so we'll go back to the characters in 1, which, you know, I like Sheva. I think Sheva is really well designed as character, but like, you know, it could have just been Chris and Jill, and I think everyone would have been happy. But anyways, Chris is sent back to West Africa. I think the place is called Kijuju. Yeah, Kijuju in West Africa. And he is sent to, what are they, retrieving an asset? I don't even remember. Like you're supposed to go meet a contact with Sheva, and then shit hits the fan.
Yeah, like I think they have intel that someone is trying to sell a bioweapon there or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you go down a whole rabbit hole, and you know, there are some conceptually interesting things that happen there. Like you find this kind of underground cave with this plant that is, I guess, the original source of the T virus. Like this is where Umbrella originally found this thing and started harvesting it and kind of mutating it into this virus. And I don't know, that kind of works for me as a concept. And
they did it in every game.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah, they did it in 4. They find the Las Plagas like in a cave amber thing, like they find it preserved. In 7 they find, well, I don't want to spoil that for you, but it's similar. They kind of do this thing in every game.
Okay. Well,
yeah. But now they have to reveal a new thing in the cave. Like it's a different MacGuffin in the cave, basically.
But it's just all caves and all MacGuffins all the way down. So
exactly.
if I enjoyed this cave MacGuffin, then boy, am I in for some treats with the rest of these games.
And then we get to ask, like, what did Oswald Spencer have to do with this? Or, you know, Richard Spencer, whatever the original Umbrella guys, which is always kind of like left a little hazy.
Yeah. And so you fight a lot of these henchmen of Wesker that are at various points injecting themselves with different amounts of the virus to give themselves these superpowers, which, as you could imagine, turns them into these giant, like, glowing orange spot tentacle monsters and shit with some horrible dialogue, and sets up some kind of mid boss fights and all this stuff. Wesker is the main villain, and I guess he has some kind of long-standing rivalry with Chris that I'm not fully in tune with, but as a villain, he's just so goofy, especially to me, not having that history. Like you mentioned earlier, he is just like, someone saw The Matrix and thought, man, Neo is just the coolest person that has ever existed, which like, we have all done that at some point, but I think for most of us, it's when we were like 13 and not when we were in a position to put out a video game that was going to sell 15 million copies.
Well, and I always think about how this sort of bled into the movies, and like how they were like, yeah, fuck yeah, let's have like this dude do some Matrix shit so we can have cool action scenes. Like, it kind of affected like the whole franchise doing this kind of stuff.
God, and the movies are a whole other can of worms to get into. Yeah, I again have limited exposure to them, but my exposure to them has been very interesting.
So I think Wesker's whole beef with Chris is just that Chris thwarts him in the first game. He was gonna steal like the T virus and the G virus and start making tyrants, I think, and you know, like I said this to you earlier today, but like Wesker is basically like a Final Fantasy villain. Like he just I'm not sure his like end game really makes sense. He just wants to infect and fuck up the world and like be the superior evolution of like humanity, I guess, but like he wants to stand alone in that conclusion, I think.
Yeah, and of course he's betraying anyone that works with him, which is supposed to come as some big surprise. Like, oh man, this guy is so evil. He betrayed his partner who could have possibly seen this coming. But yeah.
Which is a twist in the first game. It works in the first game because he's like on your team.
Yeah.
And like it's a reveal that he's like, I'm actually in on this, and I'm gonna like, you know, I'm going to find my success and become rich and powerful and all this shit from it. So it works in that way. And then bringing him back, it's just like, he's just like the edgiest bad guy.
Yeah. And so you have all these kind of Matrix-y fights with him where you're, you know, planting yourself down, shooting bullets at him, and he's just kind of like Matrix dodging around everything until you can happen to, you know, get a couple hits on him. And it goes through so many different phases. It's actually, I don't mind the fights against him. It goes on a little too long. Like you end up trying to escape in a helicopter and crashing into a volcano and having this giant like confrontation with him in the middle of a volcano surrounded by lava and all this shit. Doesn't
he die like Terminator style too?
He sure does. He also
with his hand raised up and everything.
Yes.
Fuck yeah.
Hell yes. It's awesome. He also dies like 3 different times before the Terminator death.
Yeah. I was gonna say just on the mechanics of the co-op too. I think one of the big problems with that is like they wanted to have this function of like a secondary player, but they didn't have it figured out in the way that like the Uncharted games or like The Last of Us did. So like the AI is really bad. And like in those fights where you need your partner to like stop fucking around and like shoot the guy or do the thing, they'll like like get stuck in a loop of healing or like trying to come to you or something like that.
Oh yeah, your partner kind of sucks, and you have some basic commands where you can lead them around to like pick up things or use things, but they only kind of, they generally will listen to you. They just, if you're not directly commanding them, they will make the dumbest possible decision at all times.
Right. Gotta love that.
Yeah. Which, it's fine. Fortunately, we played most of this together in co-op, so I didn't have a whole lot of experience with Sheva doing questionable things. But yeah, I mean, overall, like I said, I guess just kind of wrapping it up, I think it's pretty good. Yeah, I can definitely understand why this did become regarded as sort of the start of the downfall of the series. And you can see that it's, I don't think anyone is out there calling this a classic in the way a lot of the games in this actual series are. But I do think it's, better and more fun than its reputation would suggest. And I mean, it has its defenders out there. Like this series is still, it's talked about a lot. Like this is still a really popular series. It's in the middle of its big revival with all the newer games doing extremely well. So there's a lot of discourse around it. And inevitably there will be some people popping up defending Resident Evil 5, but there's also no one out there, gunning for it and getting big mad that, someone is slandering its name, which I think is probably fair. Like, yeah.
So you're saying it doesn't have like the class of like Dark Souls 2 defenders that like are like, no, fuck you, you're wrong.
No, because I mean those people are good and right and handsome and successful in life.
I'm not trying to anger their, invoke their ire or anything.
No, but yeah, it doesn't have that. It's just generally, there as one of the games that people are not going to recommend you jump into first as a newcomer to the series or someone who has only had limited experience with it and is trying to fill some gaps like I did. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that, like us, if you can get it for cheap and you got a buddy who will play it with you or something like that, then it's a pretty fun experience. I mean, it does kind of have some moments that feel like you're just sleepwalking through it. But despite those low points, I think it has a lot of fun game stuff.
Yeah, it
regardless
really does.
Of how ridiculous it is. It's video game shit, and that works.
Yeah, it's very ridiculous video game shit. It also has some genuinely incredibly well done encounter designs and some, fun combat situations that get really tense, and some of the, best and most satisfying combat and the whole, third person action game business even today. I think it's actually, in just pure gameplay terms, held up pretty well.
Yeah, I would say so. I would even say, despite, we were talking about like that era of graphics and everything having like the gritty monotone, like tans and greens and grays and stuff like that. It looked pretty good on my PC. Like once I kind of dialed it in, I thought it looked fine.
Yeah, it doesn't look bad at all. And it does have some of that, 7th generation brown with the blue smeary bloom effects and everything, but not as much as you may expect and not as much as a lot of games of that era. And it also is like weirdly friendlier to my more modern setup than even Resident Evil 6 was. Like I play on an ultra wide and I didn't have to do any weird janky shit to get it to accept that 21:9 aspect ratio. Whereas Resident Evil 6, I had to use like a third party program to be able to get that to work right. So that was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like the quality of the port is just off. And I didn't have any, I think I had to fix like that screen tearing I was getting. And I can't remember if it was the V-Sync or something like that, but once it was set up, it was fine. I didn't have any issues in like performance or the frame rate or anything like that. But, I mean, I had a similar experience with trying to play Nier Automata on PC. It's just visual, like the screen resolution is like broken on that port for some reason.
Yeah, this was also a very odd time for PC ports, especially from like Japanese developers that hadn't really got into the PC gaming space so much. So you saw a lot of like weird broken ports, which this does not seem to be really. A couple weird quirks, but yeah, I was surprised by how smooth it is. And of course, if you're a normal person just playing on a console, you won't have any of those issues. But hey.
Yeah, I don't would that say I don't even know how well you can, because maybe on Xbox it's fine. On PS5, I would assume it'd be like the PS3 streaming port or whatever.
No, they re-released a native. Okay. Yeah, there's a native version for the Xbox One and the PS4.
So. That's good. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, because that that shit sucks. It looks awful.
Oh, it's unplayable.
I tried to play God of War Ascension that way, and I was like, why can't I just have this in normal resolution and like maybe 60 frames per second?
I know.
It's just like, this just looks so fucked up. And then on top of that, like the controller input lag is just atrocious.
I can't. Like, I have a soft spot for like kind of mid-tier, like B or even C tier shitty racing games. And I tried playing like one of the MX versus ATV games or something on the PS3 streaming service on the PS4, and it was it was a nightmare.
Nope, that sounds rough.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Any final thoughts on Resident Evil 5? And how are you doing on 6?
I am most of the way through 6. Well, I don't know about most of the way. So 6 has what, 4 campaigns? Because it has 3 main campaigns, and then I think you unlock one for Ada, right?
Yeah, it's got an extra one for Ada. I almost forgot.
Yeah, which I think hers is a lot shorter from what I understand. But yeah, I played through Leon's campaign. I think like 2/3 of the way through Chris's, maybe a little more. So then I'll have whoever the third campaign is. I don't even remember.
Punching time.
Maximum
punch.
I have done a shitload of punching. Resident Evil 6 it's maybe dumber than Resident Evil 5, which is impressive.
Well, if I remember correctly, the third campaign is Albert Wesker's son, like
of course it is
Jake Wesker or some shit like that. And he also has super strength, so you do a lot of super punching, I think.
I'm kind of excited about that.
It's been a long time. I almost like, I don't know if I should revisit it or just like let you and then like just me recap somehow, because like my memories of that game are like vague, and then there are just spots that are incredibly vivid, like the running from the helicopter across the buses sequence. Like I can picture that clear as day, but the rest of the game, not so much.
That's probably a better way to experience it, honestly.
Just as a vague memory.
Yeah. We'll get there. Yeah. Resident Evil 6 is kind of awesome too. It's terrible. It's kind of cool too, though.
Terrible and awesome.
We'll get about it. We'll get to it. Yeah, Resident Evil 5 actually pretty good. Like better than I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting really. I didn't really have any like set expectations going into it, except that I knew people didn't really like it that much, and I was surprised by how much I did. And I think going into it without any of those expectations helps it a lot. Like not coming into this after that 5-year wait or however long it was, 4-year wait, I think, from Resident Evil 4, which, again, just undisputed masterpiece of the genre. So not expecting this to be on the same level as that, I think helped it be a pleasant surprise for me.
Would you say it is the Dark Souls 2 of the Resident Evil series?
No, I already said I wouldn't put it as the best one of the series.
Oh, right. I got you. Okay, I got it. Well, just like maybe in regard how it's sort of like the controversial, like some people are like, it's the worst one, or I don't like it, or like, actually, this shit fucking slaps. So
I think it's the Kingsfield of the Resident Evil series.
That's fair. But yeah. I would agree. I think it does slap to some 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 merit of this series, and as a game it is enjoyable to play. So
yeah, it's like it's hard to call it a good game objectively, but also it's hard to not have some amount of fun with it. So
it's schlock, and if you like schlock and you like third person shooters, it'll fit right in, I think.
It does that third person shooter schlock very well. So yeah. I'm glad we checked it out. Check back next week if you want to hear us talk. I think we're doing some more Resident Evil stuff. We're going to try to cover 6 next week, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ready to go if you are. We got 6, and then are we gonna extend this into 7 and 8, or should we revisit?
I think we may. I want to go through
like burnout.
Yeah, I was gonna say we may take a break. I don't want to get that full Resident Evil fatigue. Although I would like to get to some of the, I guess, more traditionally good ones too, and not just have 5 and 6 be my standing Resident Evil experience for a long time. But we'll see. We'll just kind of play it by ear.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll discuss what we're playing and maybe like throw in some curveballs and some other games we want to talk about.
Yep. So again, this has been Bastard Sword. We appreciate you all listening. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Rate us, like, subscribe, hit all the buttons, do all the shit. I'm Josh, and I'm out.
I'm Drew. I'm also out. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.